All right, so let's do this question now. We've got exercise 3-6, variable and fixed costs. We know what a variable cost is. A variable cost changes with the level of activity, and a fixed cost does not change with the level of activity. If I'm thinking of an example of a variable cost, just a variable cost, we can use the example from last week, which is direct material. I'm going to use DM, direct material. Direct material, as the activity, which is production, increases, the variable cost will increase, and vice versa. Right? That's a variable cost. Now, fixed cost would be something like rent. No matter how much we produce, that fixed cost is fixed within the relevant range, of course. So this cost is not dependent on production. It never changes within the relevant range. Oops, range. Now, let's just define relevant range. It's the range of activity within which both the per unit variable cost and the total fixed costs do not change. Okay, so to give an example, let's assume that we have a factory and the fixed cost for rent is $10,000 a month. If I want to increase production beyond what the factory can produce, then I'm probably going to have to rent another factory. And so at that point, when we go beyond 10,000 units, then the fixed costs are going to jump up, most likely by another $10,000 if we rent another location, which is of the same size. But within the 1 unit all the way to 10,000 units, we're only going to spend $10,000. So the relevant range between 1 and 10,000 is going to be that amount of rent. So what we have to decide is whether something is a fixed cost or whether it is a variable cost. So what follows are a number of resources that are used by a manufacturer of futons. Assume that the output measure or cost driver is the number of futons produced. So again, that's the activity, right? So we've got power to operate a drill to drill holes in the wooden frame of futons. Since producing more units would equal amount of electricity be used, I think electricity would probably be variable, because unless we pay a flat rate for the electricity, and here in Ontario we don't pay a flat rate, it's based on usage, and the higher the usage, the more you're going to pay. So I would say electricity would be variable. I'm going to just say VC if it's a variable cost. Cloth to cover the futon mattress. So B, it's going to be VC, because the more futons we produce, the more fabric we're going to use. Salary of the factory receptionist. It's a fixed cost. Cost of food and decorations for the annual Christmas Day party for all factory employees. Don't forget, this is based on how many futons we produce. If we produce more futons, are people going to eat more? And the answer is no. The level of activity here is manufacturing the number of futons. So if we produce more futons or less futons, it's not going to change the cost of a party. If we were saying that the level of activity is the number of people at the party, then it would be variable. So I think this is a fixed cost because it's not connected to the activity we're talking about. So we're going to put this down as a fixed cost. Now, fuel for a forklift used to move materials in the factory, fixed or variable? It is going to be a variable cost, because if we produce more futons, then you got to imagine that the forklift truck is going to move a lot more material. Depreciation on the factory, it's a fixed cost. And it's a fixed cost because the factory doesn't change, like whether we produce 1 or whether we produce 500 futons, we're going to depreciate the factory in the same way. So depreciation on the forklift used to move partially completed goods. And we've got a fixed cost, and it is, I apologize. I thought I put fixed cost down for F. And G is also a fixed cost. Wages paid to workers who assemble the futon frame. This is direct labor. Now, do people work more hours if they produce more futons? It's definitely a variable cost. And there's a lot of argument about this, but in this course, we're going to assume that this is a variable cost. As we produce more futons, these people have to work more hours, and assume also that we pay them per hour, that we're not paying them a salary. We're paying them for the number of hours they worked. And if we produce more, this is going to increase the cost. So we're going to put this as a variable cost. So now I says wages paid to workers who maintain the factory equipment. And I would say this is a fixed cost. Doesn't change with the level of activity. When individuals are maintaining machinery, they're just maintaining machinery. It doesn't matter how much it's used. They have a maintenance schedule. They're just going to maintain the machinery no matter how much it's used. Cloth rags used to wipe the excess stain off of the wooden furniture. That's going to be a variable cost, because the more futons we produce, the more cloth rags we're going to use. So keep in mind that you need to step back and say, okay, what is the activity? Because if we changed the activity, we might change whether it is fixed or variable. Okay, so keep that in mind. When we change the way we're counting the activity, the way we define the activity, it could change it from being fixed to being variable. So just keep that in mind.